Hi everyone, I'm Matt and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. As everyone knows, we love to cover news about UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs, particularly their serious side. This includes the phenomenon itself, its national security implications, and Congress's legislative efforts. We also like to talk about the Pentagon's UFO office, AARO, otherwise known as the Pentagon's in-house bullshit factory, and the Pentagon's sole source contractor for their raw material of bullshit provided by the CIA. Now, as everyone knows, you can have the best product in the world, but no matter how good that product is, it will likely flop if you don't have a good marketing team and social media influencers to peddle it. Luckily, the Pentagon and the CIA have their own UFO bullshit marketing team, the Professional Debunkers. Now, the Professional Debunkers peddle the Pentagon and CIA's bullshit product to hoodwink Congress and the American people by tweeting excessively on Twitter, rewriting Wikipedia, and writing news articles parroting Pentagon talking points. Today, we have news that the CEO of the professional debunking operation, Mick West, is writing a book about UFOs and asking for help. A veteran UFO researcher sent us this message from Mick West, quote, "I follow you on Twitter, and I think you are one of the most sensible and thoughtful people on UFO X, even if we have a few disagreements over the science and the nature of the experiences. I'm writing a book on UFOs and recent ufology. The working title is The Anomaly Hunters. I want to accurately represent all perspectives. Would you be up for an interview in the next week or so? We could do it however you feel comfortable. It could be entirely off the record, on background, anonymous, on the record, all or in part, a podcast episode, or even a live discussion." Now, we can all make fun of the clownsmanship of the debunkers, and Lord knows there are a lot of clowns out there, but here's the thing about professional debunkers. Their job is to debunk. Plain and simple, that's it. It's not a hard concept. They are not interested in an honest conversation or even getting to the truth. So, when a debunker emails you asking for your help, claiming they want to represent all perspectives, they are not selling you the truth. They are selling you bullshit. It's not a book deal, it's a bunk deal.
Haley!
Could it possibly?
Lou Elizondo talks about ontological shock. Okay, yeah, Lou Elizondo says ontological shock is very real. I have seen it on the battlefield and in the halls of Congress. The impact on people is real, regardless if one believes in exceptional experiences. Compassion, care, and understanding is what is needed, now more than ever in our world. Remember, as a friend once said to me, impossible is just something we haven't seen yet. Thank you, Jonathan, for bringing this to our attention. And he's commenting, of course, on this article from Unhidden. Unhidden has today published its white paper on the impact of exceptional experiences in the disclosure on mental health and well-being. At its heart is the simple proposition that the UK government should publicly acknowledge that UAP sightings and other forms of exceptional experiences are real, and that the people who are affected need better care and support. The Unhidden white paper makes 5 key recommendations, largely for the UK government. Did Justin Trudeau receive a memo that confirms the UFO crash retrieval program? That's huge, guys. We've got that and a lot more to talk about today. Okay, from Nick Gold, just a reminder that the February 15th, 2023 Canadian memo sent to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to brief him on the North American UAP shootdowns at Balloon Gate, which was dug up by CTV News, seems to prove that not only is there an active UAP crash recovery program, but NORAD was already up to UAP number 20 in their annual numbering system by February. Let's just go over the actual memo itself. Okay, here we go. Check it out. NORAD numbers objects on a sequential basis, so they were already up to number 20. That's wild. Number 23, the object in question, its function, method of propulsion, and affiliation to any nation state remains unverified. It is unknown whether it poses an armed threat or has intelligence collection capabilities. The full exploitation of UAP number 20, so it's a different one, which was engaged by the U.S. on February 10th, 2023, has not been completed. Yeah, they haven't fully either recovered it or reverse engineered it at that time. Wow. A Canadian notice to aviators was issued in the engagement area to allow for safe airspace. They were preparing for the shoot down, I guess. At approximately 1,530 hours Ottawa time, a U.S. NORAD F-22 Raptor successfully engaged UAP number 23 in Canadian airspace under NORAD authorities. NORAD Canadian CF-18 Hornets had to be scrambled, but the F-22s were better located based on time, space, and fading light. The CAF is currently leading recovery operations with aircrafts attempting to identify the impact point and a ground team ready to proceed to the location. However, the mountainous terrain, existing snow cover, and expected new snowfall make prospect of recovery unlikely. The area in which the impact occurred is known as Caribou Migration Route, which opens the possibility of future accidental discovery by indigenous hunters. I can talk, guys. Should the object not be found during the recovery operation. So yeah, there was a little scare there, right? So some regular folk could stumble upon this UFO. We better speed things along. Wow. As additional UAP are detected, we will continue to keep you apprised. So if this is legit, if this memo is legit, this is absolutely hard evidence that there is a UFO crash recovery team. Different nations know about it. They take precautions to keep regular folk from learning about it. They are exploiting this technology. There's a number system. There was already 23 of them in February. You know, that's crazy, guys. That's insane. That's insane, guys. And, you know, Ross Coulthard has confirmed that at least one of the objects in Balloon Gate was genuinely anomalous. How many of them were? Why haven't they released any photos or videos other than that one, that first inciting incident that we know about, the Chinese balloon or whatever it was? Where are the other pictures? Where's the other pilot testimony talking about shooting these balloons down, right? And why did the Biden administration suddenly get engaged in the UAP topic right during that time? Ross Coulthard also has reported that Biden ordered the shoot down of at least one of these objects. If there were multiple shoot downs, you would think that he would have authorized multiple shoot downs, but who knows? Who knows? Either way, great stuff.
Take a look at this video. This is a video shot by a local who was standing on the front lawn of his beach house near Langley Air Force Base across the water, filming on the evening of December 14th, right after sunset. He was watching what was meant to be that night's meteor shower. He says that around 7:15, he began to see red blinking lights from the direction of Virginia Beach coming in high and circling north of Langley Air Force Base, heading west and then passing directly over the base, heading east and back in the direction they came. It began as one or two coming every few minutes, and at its peak, he said, I would say there would be upwards of 5 over the base that would sometimes stop and hover directly over the base. This witness says they were always blinking from white to reddish orange. The blinking wasn't uniform, and these weren't planes. The lights were not on the ends of wings or rotors. They were round orbs of light. What's very interesting is this witness does not believe that these objects, whatever they are, can be easily explained away as commercial drones. He says they didn't behave like a commercial drone. And the one thing that does puzzle me is if you were some kind of non-human intelligence or some kind of stealth technology coming in to get a peek at a US military base, why would you have flashing lights? Now, that's the issue we're going to explore today on Reality Check. And let me now bring in our first guest for today, Ryan Graves. As you know, the Warzone periodical online has been reporting that there were drone swarms over Langley Air Force Base throughout December, and that in fact, at one stage, a very sophisticated aircraft, the WB-57 aircraft, which is a NASA research aircraft, was actually flown in to apparently get involved in whatever it was that was being surveilled over the base. Do you have any comment, any response to what's been seen allegedly over Langley Air Force Base?
Well, I think it's incredibly important, Ross, that we pay attention and respect the indications that we're seeing from these drone incursions. It may not seem like that big of a strategic flaw to have these types of drone incursions on a base like this, but it does not take that many UAVs, that many drones to cause a serious national security concern, as we've seen in the Middle East with attacks on pipelines and airports.
Do you think there is any evidence at the moment to conclude definitively that they are commercial drones?
Well, I haven't seen enough data on this particular case to be able to say one way or another. I know there are reports that the government is reporting these as, I believe, UAV incursions. I've heard other eyewitness testimony stating that they've seen things that are a little bit harder to explain, but I think at this point it's too early in the investigation to say either way.
Why does it matter, Ryan? I mean, obviously you created Americans for Safe Aerospace out of a genuine concern that these objects, whatever they are, they pose a threat, a possible threat to flight safety and possible threat to national security. Why? What's your concern?
Well, this is a perfect example of why we need to be able to identify what's in our airspace and why it's so critically important. We cannot have vehicles that are operating or within our airspace, especially en masse, as we're seeing here. Otherwise, we're going to have potential serious concerns with general aviation traffic, commercial traffic, and potentially military operations that could be occurring nearby. And let's not forget, these things could be considered weapons themselves. If there are a number of aircraft on the ground at this base, those would make prime targets for a small explosive.
Well, can you explain to us how significant is Langley Air Force Base? I know it's based near Virginia Beach, across the water from Virginia Beach. It's an area you know well because you've trained there with your fighter squadrons in the run-ups to preparations for deployments. What is the significance of the Langley Air Force Base? As I understand it, it's got the latest stealth fighter, the F-22.
Absolutely. It's not that dissimilar to the type of operations that we are flying in Virginia Beach ourselves in the F-18. Just further to the north, the Navy is conducting their operations with the F-22, and just further north, we're already into DC. So this is very congested airspace. It's not airspace where you would be expecting a large number of assets to be uncontrolled and unaccounted for. And yet we've seen repeatedly them to cross into controlled airspace, military bases, and what they're doing, we simply don't know yet.
It's clear from the Warzone article that there was a large response to whatever it was that was buzzing Air Force Base Langley. One of the things that characterises the objects that the witness I've spoken to saw were that these were flashing lights. They were flashing irregularly, but they appeared to have strobing lights on them, reddish, orange, white lights. That doesn't sound like something that would be trying to stealthily operate over a secret government base, something that's protected by high security like Air Force Base Langley. Is it plausible to you that these would be stealth drones that are being flown over a base in a way that's intended to be unobtrusive if they're operating flashing lights?
Well, no, I don't think they would be intended to be stealth with the way you've just described it. And yes, that's what I've heard as well. We are seeing these objects blinking with white lights, not in the strobe pattern that one would expect due to FAA regulations, but patterns that don't seem to meet anything that I'm aware of. Additionally, the objects apparently have been lit up, the large number of them, while they're operating over the base itself. So it did not appear, at least from the information I've received, that these objects were trying to conceal their location or their presence.
So this is quite interesting. This is something being operated intelligently in an overt way over a very sensitive military facility. It's almost like it's sticking its tongue out and saying, catch me if you can, because it doesn't appear that they did recover one of these objects. There's no suggestion from any of the reports that are made in the Warzone periodical that there's been any capture or any bringing down of a UAV, and yet we do have anti-UAV technology that's meant to be able to bring these things down with some kind of electromagnetic beam weapon.
Well, yeah, we would think that we do have those capabilities, but as I believe it was the oncoming Northcom commander said, that this was one of the largest priorities, or was one of his number one priorities for the first 90 days in his position. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he suggested that we simply don't have the national infrastructure to be able to deal with these types of problems.
And let's put aside the possibility of, if you like, NHI and non-human intelligence being responsible for these objects for a moment, Ryan. Let's just consider the possibility that they are simply some kind of stealthy drone that's been able to insert itself over a US military facility in a way that has allowed those objects to operate with impunity. They haven't been brought down. That in and of itself is a grave national security concern, isn't it? Even if these are some kind of drone or UAV being operated by either a civilian or potentially unfriendly foreign adversary.
Absolutely. It's a full stop situation. And we don't have to know where they're from to know it's a problem. The fact that we have unknown assets operating over those types of facilities is a full stop. We don't have to determine whether they're foreign adversary or whether they're UAP. All we know is that they are there, and we need to have the resources and attention to be able to deal with it.
You might remember back in December 2019, President Trump signed into law appropriations bills that authorized the creation of what's called the Space Force.
From the outside, it may look like any other military base, but getting onto this base was no easy task. We had to be accompanied by badge-carrying officials and driven in a military van onto base. Once on base, we were only allowed in pre-approved locations. We're quickly reminded how serious these men and women take their roles.
The celebrity of it was really fun early on. Now, you know, it's very challenging because you have to know a lot of things, and there's a lot of interest that we have as a nation in space, and protecting those interests is a difficult job.
A part of that job is keeping track of every single thing floating around in space, from satellites to even an astronaut's toolbox.
Each piece, thousands, tens of thousands of objects, has a piece. We have to see all those objects all the time. We have to maintain track of all those objects all the time.
Our day started at the Aggressor Barn. From the outside, it looks like a garage, but when we walk in, we were greeted with a tiki bar and photos, almost a man cave kind of feel. But walk a few feet back and you quickly begin to realize this is anything but a hangout. The servicewomen and men who greet us there are called aggressors, and they explain this space is a tribute to the exclusive group of service members who have served here before.
A lot of the heritage of being aggressors is we act like the bad guys in exercises, right? So we draw on some of the heritage of our great power competitors like Russia and China, and we really root our activities to replicate their threats.
We're greeted by members of several branches of the U.S. military. Navy, Marine Corps, Army, Air Force, and Space Force uniforms can be seen in the main area at the Aggressor Barn. Not unusual on many bases, but it's a reminder of exactly how big the role of Space Force, the youngest child, if you will, of the armed forces, plays in all branches. Like the Marine Corps historically was born out of the U.S. Navy, Space Force was born out of the Air Force, as more of a specialized focus that goes beyond traditional U.S. airspace.
That we ever go to conflict, all of our guys have already seen what's going to happen, they train against it, but they know how to defeat.
We're given an in-depth presentation from aggressors about the history of the aggressors, which dates back to the 1970s, After the U.S. lost many of their air-to-air battles in Vietnam, the aggressors were created as a more in-depth training for pilots. Think of this as the equivalent of the Navy's Top Gun program. Their goal, to replicate the technology our enemies use against us.
We try to bring that intelligence to life and make it real for our own friendly forces.
The Space Force aggressors show us how with somewhat basic, inexpensive equipment, our adversaries can block satellite signals. They turn this machine on, and the Garmin GPS I'm holding suddenly goes dead.
So basically with $10,000 worth of equipment, an adversary could take out GPS equipment.
Yes, over an entire area. They could take out an entire airport for just a few $1,000s.
And more sophisticated equipment can do even more damage. Then we head outside, where we see some of the most important weapons the Space Force has in their arsenal: satellites.
There's been exponential growth from our adversaries in the last decade.
China, Russia, or even more primitive adversaries like terror groups can, and some have tried before, to block our satellite signals that beam back important surveillance images. Stopping that, which Space Force does and does well, is why they are so important to every branch of the military and for every single American. Remember, satellites power our phones, our power grids, pretty much everything, making space the next potential battlefield worldwide.
I think the next war will be cyber and space.
What does a war in space look like? I mean, when I hear space and a war, it's kind of freaky.
It's not just, war in space and aliens coming and, people shooting like Star Trek and something like that, but their everyday life could change. Can you imagine not being able to access your money at all on your phone, or even your phone not working at all, having no access to your phone? Our whole lives could change.
So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. Did the Air Force give you a ride in the X-37B? And what on earth do they mean by Space Force?
We've been trying for quite some time, probably 3 or 4 months, to get onto a Space Force base. And you can imagine with the military, there was all sorts of back and forth and hoops to jump through and background checks. And we finally got onto those bases in Colorado. We didn't get a ride, but we did get to see, it was interesting access to see sort of behind the scenes of what they do. And of course, you only get to see the things that they want to show you. I mean, you know how frustrating it can be doing some of these military stories because it's a very controlled environment, but it was still really eye-opening.
So one of the things that intrigued me off the top is there was a young Space Force officer you interviewed called Devin Rushing, who's what's called a Delta II weapons officer. Now, as I understand it, my friend, there's an outer space treaty that forbids the use of weapons in outer space. What on earth is Space Force doing talking about weapons? What's this reference to weapons all about?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's the first question I asked him too. Like, what exactly does your title mean? It all sounds very sci-fi, almost like out of a movie. When they say weapons officer, it's sort of like a generic term. It's kind of weird, but it doesn't actually refer to specific weapons. At least that's what they say. And they won't talk about having any weapons in space. Like I said, there's a ton of like confidential behind the scenes stuff that they weren't allowed to talk about, but they're not acknowledging any weapons in space. And when I asked him what the title meant, he said, oh, it's more of just a generic term. And it doesn't mean anything about a specific weapon or anything. But they did say in terms of like war in space, they do believe that the next world war will be in outer space and fought in space. They were very clear about that, which is why, it's now the sixth branch of the military in the U.S., why they say it's so important, Space Force.
Yes, I saw your interview there with the Chief Master Sergeant, who said, I think the next war will be cyber in space. And then she went on to say, it's not just war in space and aliens coming.
Yeah.
People shooting like Star Trek. What do you mean, not just? I'm having a bit of fun here, but really, it appeared to contemplate the possibility that part of this is being prepared for the possibility of engagement with something else.
Yeah, it's interesting. I went into this really wanting to get the answer to that question. Of course, I've followed all of your UFO reporting and done a little bit of it myself. And I was very interested in what they knew about UFOs because they have surveillance in space really unlike anyone else. I mean, they can see. Again, they'll only tell us so much, especially when it comes to the equipment and the satellites they have. But, they say they can see 22,000 miles, maybe even more into space. And they've got an entire unit of Space Force. Their entire job around the clock, 365 days a year, is just monitoring space and monitoring every single little object that they can see. So, of course, I was interested in, do you ever see unidentified objects out there? And they were very quick to shut me down. They do not want to talk at all about UFOs or aliens or anything like that. They just kept going back to their entire mission being national defense and threats on Earth, mainly like China and Russia.
So they're not denying it. They didn't categorically deny that they're seeing anomalous objects in space. They just didn't answer the question.
Yeah, they didn't deny it. And it's interesting. We went to the one base where their entire job is surveillance. That's their entire unit. And they've got they call them sensors, that they monitor everything that they can see happening in space. And I asked them, is there ever anything you see that you can't identify, you're not sure what it is? Because they catalog all the items that they see. And they said even something as small as like a wrench or a bolt that came off of the space station years ago, they've got cataloged and they're tracking so they can see even really, really small objects. And I said, is there anything you come across ever that you can't identify? And they said, no, we haven't had that happen, which again, I mean, I think not that they were coached on what they could say to me, but they were definitely very guarded. And it's hard to believe that they're able to identify every single little object out there. But the one officer who I spoke to said that everything that they had seen, they were able to put into some kind of category.
There's a recent tweet from Lou Elizondo. Exactly right, Ross. No video exists and nothing to see here, folks. Well, okay, actually, there is a video, but we can't release it because it's too sensitive. Of an event that wasn't sensitive. What type of logic is that? If we look at Ross Coulthardt's tweet, this DoD Aero Freedom of Information Act response acknowledges a video does exist from the January 2023 Eglin Air Force Base UAP sighting, but refuses to release it. But someone's not being truthful because DoD Aero officially claimed in its report that there was no video because the jet recorder was not working. And if this object was just a balloon, why is it a national security secret? So this is the actual FOIA request. The responsive video you're requesting is not releasable to you in accordance with 5 USC exemption. Protects from disclosure information about matters specifically authorized under criteria established by an executive order to be kept secret in the interest of national defense or foreign policy. According to an article by Mark von Rennenkamp, the Pentagon is lying about UFOs. Congress held a historic hearing on UFOs July 26, 2023. If you remember, he had 2 former Navy fighter pilots, Ryan Graves and David Fravor, also with David Grush, relaying their events with direct visual confirmation of UAPs and amazing capabilities from these objects in an amazing exchange with Representative Matt Gaetz. I've covered a couple times on this channel. Gaetz described how he received a protected disclosure from pilot at Eglin Air Force Base, a major there, regarding a January 2023 UFO incident over the Gulf of Mexico. He was stonewalled by the Air Force and asked a House Oversight Subcommittee to subpoena radar data and images from the UFO encounter. In the hearing, Gaetz said from the images he saw of the object, he was not able to attach to any human capability, either from the United States or any of our adversaries, and he had worked on the Armed Services Committee for 7 years. So he had some experience with this topic. His office received a protective disclosure of a UAP encounter off the coast of Florida from Eglin Air Force Base. He traveled to Northwest Florida with Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett and Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, where they asked to meet with the pilots and see any images and radar data from the incident. He says, we are not afforded access to all of the flight crew, and initially, we were not afforded access to images and to radar. Thereafter, we had a bit of a discussion about how authorities flow in the United States of America. And we did see the image, and we did meet with one member of the flight crew who took the image. Gaetz said the pilot told him they were doing a test flight over the Gulf of Mexico on a clear day when 4 objects were identified on radar flying in a diamond formation. Gaetz said he's personally seen the radar data from the incident. One of the pilots goes to check out that diamond formation and sees a large floating, what I can only describe as an orb, he said. And again, not have any human capability that I'm aware of. And when the pilot approached, he said his radar went down. He said that his FLIR infrared camera system malfunctioned and he had to manually take this image from one of the lenses. Gates also said that the pilot told him explicitly that reporting UAP incidents is discouraged. He said it was stated explicitly to me by these test pilots that if you have a UAP experience, the best thing you can do for your career is forget it and not tell anyone. Because any type of reporting, either above the surface or below the surface, does have a perceived consequence for these people. And that is a culture we must change if we want to get to the truth. So from Aero's released report, this is pilot's drawing of the reported object. You can see gunmetal gray here, gray on the bottom, and then it said as an orange, reddish, looked like some sort of engine attached to the side. It said blurry air was underneath, so blurry air but no smoke. This is, I'm guessing, the two images. One image off the FLIR, off the electro-optical IR system, is here. And then this coming straight off looks like the targeting pod image to me. Aero's response is that it is one of these, a commercial light-all, commercial lighting balloon. 4 of them in some perfect diamond formation released. According to Mark von Rennenkamp, in his article titled "The Pentagon is Lying About UFOs," this so-called explanation of a large commercial lighting balloon insults the intelligence of any reader who takes a few moments to review the details of the incident. It did not convince the world's most prominent UFO skeptic. The pilot's sketch of the object, described as akin to an Apollo spacecraft, bears no plausible resemblance to the design of any known industrial lighting balloon. That would be from Mick West. This Eglin UFO looks like a white sphere wearing a hat. The image on the left is the IR thermal image, adjusting the levels only. It shows a quite irregular hat, which is not really consistent with the lighting balloon hypothesis. Mark von Rennenkamp called the Florida-based company that produces the high-end commercial lighting balloons alluded to by the UFO office, Aero. According to the firm, it is unheard of that such industrial-grade tethered balloons would spontaneously float away. Unheard of. In a brief video, Emmy-winning lighting designer Matt Ford, who has used the lighting balloons in question, detailed the sheer absurdity of the Pentagon's explanation. It gets more interesting because Mark von Rennenkamp reports that there were 80 knots of wind at altitude that day. So 80 knots of wind. How are these objects able to hold stationary? As Ryan Graves reported off the East Coast, these objects are able to hold stationary in hurricane-class winds. That's just impossible. Gates has stated that the Pentagon's assessment is incomplete and does not reflect all of the data I was shown. He also called for the public release of the images and radar data associated with the encounter. And this was from Mick West. With the new Eglin UFO, the fact that it had no airspeed recorded means that it's impossible to rule out that it was just a balloon or 4 balloons. It might also be an alien spaceship, but I'd put balloon at number 1 with the current data. So this is from the Aero report. UAP-1 operated at an altitude of about 16,000 feet above ground level. The second and third UAPs were noted at altitudes of 17 to 18,000 feet. The fourth was lost from radar. No altitude was noted. Moreover, no airspeeds were noted for any of the UAP in this report. So these are experienced pilots, actually, and seeing 4 of these commercial lighting balloons supposedly in a diamond formation in 80 knots of winds just seems impossible to me, especially if they're holding stationary. If we look here, what is the blurry air underneath with no smoke? What is that from? According to Aero, it's earthshine is what they call it. Just seems ridiculous to me. As reported by Mark von Rennenkamp, just seems impossible that 4 of these would be released and then somehow stay within the same formation. And it doesn't make sense based on what we're actually looking at in the IR sensors. And another final question is there a video? Ross Coulthard pointed to that FOIA request. Is there an additional video? So quite interesting details released from Eglin Air Force Base. 80 knots of wind that day. How can you have these stationary objects that don't have any realistic, mundane examples? Matt Gaetz was stonewalled when it happened, and it sounds like he's not giving up. According to Senator Gillibrand, there is talk of public hearings this summer. Hopefully, we'll actually get some public hearings and get more of this data released. Lou Elizondo also said he traveled to DC this past weekend to meet with interested parties. So hopefully it's spinning up and we can get more data released, more information, and hopefully some public hearings this summer, because we continue to get information like this released from Arrow that doesn't seem to make sense. They appear to only be on the side of mundane explanations and not even considering listening to the pilots and listening to their actual accounts.